Hello, my loves. I am going to get started exactly at 2:30 because I have a lot to cover. This was originally a 3-hour talk that was edited down to a 90-minute talk that is being edited down to a 40-minute talk. So I'm going to do my best. And if you guys have questions, just drop them in the chat, and I'm going to try to again, keep it under 40 minutes so that I can, so that we can have a little bit of time to talk at the end. Okay. The title of this talk is Gopaul Chetty and the Marriage of Swedenborg and Śaiva Siddhanta. And I wanted to open with this quote from Maharishi Tirumalar. The ignorant say that love and God are different. None know that love and God are the same. When they know that love and God are the same, they rest in God as love. I'm Punitavati Ammayar. Some of you may know me as Eleanor Schnarr. Punitavati was the name that my guru gave me, and you can ask me more about it. I love talking about her. As you probably know, I have an MFA from the San Francisco Art Institute, and I am a current MA student at the Graduate Theological Union. I came to this point in my research after getting very interested in Swedenborgian meditation techniques and in Swedenborg's idea of the brain and of the subtle body. And I've talked about those things at previous conventions, and all of those videos are available on my YouTube if you are interested in them. So this is kind of where my research has taken me and where all of that kind of concluded. So why does this story that I'm about to tell you, why does it matter? I was very blessed to learn yoga and meditation at a very young age through Bryn Athyn College. They had a little meditation chapel that I used to go to with Devin Zuber and my mom. So it has been an important and really central and life-saving part of my spiritual practice all my life. Subtle energy, interoception, chakras, auras, and meditation were also all core parts to Swedenborg's own spiritual practice. And I think the embodied part of his spirituality is really something very, very special that we really need to explore more deeply. Swedenborgians in general really love studying Hindu sacred texts. And we like to think of ourselves as very kind of pluralistic. And yet hardly anything is actually known about the actual Hindu followers of Swedenborg and their contributions to our tradition. The historical relationship between these traditions, that is Swedenborgianism and Saiva Siddhanta, is actually a profound gift to the new church, both as an ecclesiastical organization, but also the new church as a state of mind. It's a paradigm which can dynamically engage with and learn from wisdom traditions from all over the world. It can challenge normative power dynamics and present a radically inclusive vision of heaven. So this is a love story between the East and the West. I'm not sure what the ending's going to look like, but we get to decide how it does and how it moves forward. So with this in mind, I present the story of Gopaul Chetty. Gopaul Chetty lived from 1867 to 1953. He started out as a lawyer. He spent some time as a superintendent for a boys' school. He was an author, a translator, a publisher, a social reformer, and a Swedenborgian. He was born in Dharmapuri in the Madras Presidency in British India, which is, if I can get the annotation to work, this area. So this is where we're talking about. All right. You all know who Emanuel Swedenborg was, but I think I wanted to use Chetty's own words to kind of describe how he sums up Swedenborgian theology. He says, Swedenborg identifies substance with love. In other words, we are not to identify love with the abstract conceptual identity ordinarily termed substance, but rather we are to take the word substance with its whole meaning and apply it to that concrete living experience which we know directly, immediately, and intimately as love. This doctrine, so interpreted, constitutes a new epoch in the history of philosophy. For according to it, we turn our search for reality from the world of abstract conceptions at once to the actual concrete world of living experience in all its fullness and variety we now call love. The whole body of Swedenborg's doctrine and the philosophy contained in it is literally an exposition of this nature of love. Heaven is where the Lord is recognized, trusted, and loved. The different ways he is worshipped and variations that stem from the difference of activity from one community to another do not cause harm, but bring benefit because they are a source of heaven's perfection. So one of the teachings that Swedenborg brings us is something that I like to call radical humanism. And this is something that I have always kept very, very close to my heart. And this is taken from his book, The Last Judgment, where he says that the Gentiles who in the world had worshiped God under the human form and had led lives of charity according to their religious principles were associated with Christians in heaven, for they acknowledge and adore the Lord more than others. So as I was doing this research, I kept going over these lines in my head, and I started asking myself really, what was the divine human, capital D, capital H, and could the divine human be something that actually transcended what we think of as normative Christianity? And how can traditions of embodied divinity be distinctly one, this phrase that Swedenborg uses, that there is both distinction, but that the fact of the worship of God in the human form has something that brings people together in a very unique way. And so I started asking myself that what if the divine human was actually as dynamic, expansive, and sacred as humanity itself? And then I reached the conclusion that there was no way that it could not be. And so as I was doing this research, it became clear to me that the best way for me to serve the new church as it really existed was to serve Śaiva Siddhānta. So that's where my path is hopefully taking me in the future. And I wanted to really highlight Emanuel Swedenborg's qualified non-dualism. I'm not going to read this whole quote because it'll take too long, but the last line, we may therefore conclude that the innumerably many components that constitute a kind of unity in us are distinguishably one, supremely so, and supremely so in that quintessential person who is God. So with all that in mind, I want to dive into this story that will hopefully make you question what we normally think of as the new church. And so with this idea of unity and difference, I wanted to really lay out what are the doctrinal similarities and differences between these two theologies. On the one hand, we have similarities, what I'm going to call confirmations, and differences, what I'm going to call conversations, which I think is cute. Let's start with the differences. One of the big things I like to call this the conversation between idol worship and scripture worship, because there is, the practice of honoring and worshiping images in Hinduism. And this is one of the things that Swedenborg kind of directly deals with. And I think that I'm not going to spend too long on this, but I think that the conversation can be summed up that what I hear Swedenborg say about the letter of the word really aligns with what I hear a lot of Hindus say about an icon, that it's not about that you make a mistake if you think the important thing is the physicality. Rather, it's the physicality is a vessel for scriptural reality through sacred metaphor and through correspondences. The place of the self and reincarnation, another amazing conversation that needs to be had. And again, it's a huge ball of twine. I could do an entire mini course just on that question. Cultural and aesthetic differences, amazing. Hegemonic colonial, a great opportunity to re-examine our place in the world. And what I think is probably the most important one as far as how things played out historically is the difference between a guru lineage and an ecclesiastical organization. And we're going to see how that plays out, but just put a little pin in that's going to be a really interesting point of contention. It's also ancient versus modern. Swedenborg lived 200 something years ago, and Maharishi Tirumular, as we will see, probably lived around 500 BC. But the similarities are really, I think, what got Gopaul Chetty excited and what got me excited to a certain degree. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions that a lot of Westerners have about Hinduism is that this is very much a monotheistic type of theology, and the oneness of God then kind of descends through the layers of reality, producing different expressions, which then are characterized anthropomorphically as different devas. And within that monotheism, there is a certain centrality of divine love, which is why I opened with that quotation, fools think that God and love are different. I will say this. I will share this as a presentation. That is no problem. Hegemonic colonial. So whenever we're dealing with this, we kind of have to deal with the whole history of colonialism, which is one of the slides that I cut out. But when you look at Gopaul Chetty's life in particular, his life parallels Mahatma Gandhi's. So everything that's happening with the reception of Swedenborg is happening in the socio-political context of colonialism. And that's something that we really need to be aware of as something that's going to be affecting people and affecting how things get read and how texts get read. Pluralism, variety of worship. I think this concept is important because it makes the two traditions mutually co-inclusive, which is a phrase that I really like saying. Dualistic non-duality. I could again do a whole mini course on this, and a lot of people associate Hinduism with Advaita Vedanta, with this idea that, thou art that everything is Brahman. But Śaiva Siddhānta is actually a dualistic system, as we're going to see. There's a very important separation between the soul and God, which actually mirrors Swedenborg a lot more closely than what he gets commonly compared to. Three eternal verities, 3 degrees. again, fascinating metaphysics that we can talk about if people want to. This idea of sacred marriage in both tantra and conjugal love is incredibly important, and I think one of the, again, I think the body is the first scripture. I think the body exists before scripture, and I think the body is a scripture that is common to many faiths. And when you see both Swedenborg and Tirmular raise up the experience of sexuality into cosmic significance, and I think there's a really, really beautiful and important connection there that shouldn't be underestimated. And the last one, which I think is one that is kind of the practical connection moving forward, is this amazing phenomena of internal breathing and pranayama that get connected together, where Swedenborg was very clearly aware of what gets called the subtle body. And I think he is actually could be called the discoverer of the subtle body in the West. And I think that discovery, because this is all, in his work on the soul and his work on the brain and in his late pre-theological stuff, it doesn't get enough attention brought to it. But I think from what I've been studying, when you look at what he was actually doing in his own kind of meditative and spiritual practice, it looks a lot like yoga. And I'm going to keep coming back to that because I think what that indicates is that perhaps there is some kind of embodied reality that we should be looking more deeply into as a community. Yeah, and here are some comparative wall paintings from the Swedenborgian Temple in San Francisco and Brihadeshwara Temple in Tamil Nadu. Let me speak, entwining intelligence with silence. Remain firm as long as mind can hold. I shall speak, though it is not easy, my son. See within this the welding and the division. If the base of intelligence is found, the physical body becomes one of camphor. As Shiva comes to reside in his temple, he gives gathered food for us to eat. So I wanted to show you the image of the Shiva Nataraj because it is my favorite image of God. And I have this distinct memory of being a little girl and going to the Philadelphia Art Museum and seeing one of these illuminated in a dark gallery, and my mom quoting Nietzsche saying, I would not worship a God who couldn't dance. And the more I get deeper into the spiritual system, the more I become appreciative of the presence of dynamism within the grand human of heaven, within the divine human of God, and to see that dance itself, not only of the creation and destruction of moments as we experience them in our everyday consciousness, but also within the variety of the possible expressions and the seeing the dance of Shiva within, the difference between Christianity and Hinduism and Islam and all of these other wisdom traditions. Like that is it. That is part of the variety that makes unity. And so if anyone can guess where this particular Nataraja is, I'll give you a gold star. Hint, it's not in India. So what is Saiva Siddhanta? And I know, like, I didn't know anything about this a year or two ago. So I know it's a lot to absorb, but basically we're gonna start with this pie chart down here. Yes, the Philly Art Museum. So we're gonna start with this one down here. And this is world religions by percentage. So about 13% of people in the world are Hindus. Out of them, we have about 70% are Gauriya Vaishnavits. These are ISKCON. And so this is kind of probably the form of Hinduism that most people are familiar with. But 26%, about a quarter of them are Shaivites. And so that's where we are. And then within Shaivism is all of this. And so we're down here in Tamil Śaiva Siddhanta. So in Chetty's day, there were about 20 million, but it's not, you know, I think it's important to kind of orient ourselves within this massive complexity that is Hinduism. So two important people who I want to introduce you to, who are important for this story, are Saint Tirumular, who wrote the 3,000 verse encyclopedia of Tamil spiritual knowledge called the Tirumandaram, which is a beautiful and amazing text. And people aren't sure where he lived, but according to legend, he spent 1 year writing every verse. So he has lived, will live, is maybe still around in some form for 3,000 years. And he's wonderful. I really love him, and I really got into his texts. And the other one is Saint Maikanda Devar, who was a 13th century child prodigy who wrote this text called Shivananavaltam. And that text is actually very short, and all of his students ended up writing commentaries on that text, which then became kind of the modern Śaiva canon. There's also the 63 Dayanmars, who I'm not going to talk about because that makes it too complicated. But Saint Maikanda Devar is important for this story because in 1925, Sir T.M. Sivananam Pillai, B.A., ex-minister to the government of Madras, said at a public meeting that Swedenborg was Maikanda Deva come to life again. And this seems to be kind of a popular idea that got going. And I'm really interested in how, and like, what does it mean? What does it mean for Swedenborgians that people, you know, that this claim is being made? And, you know, might we like kind of entertain that, and how might we interpret it? So a couple of people who are kind of the modern leaders of this movement, Guruji Shiva Yogi Shiva Rajan. This is the guru who I've been following. He's an absolute treasure. We've been studying every night for the last couple of months. Yogacharya M. Govindan Satchitananda is the head of Babaji's Kriya Yoga Order of Acharyas, which has its basis in Quebec. Shivaya Subramanya Swami, he just died in 2001, but he was for a very long time, he was the head guru of the Saiva Siddhanta Church, which is based out of Hawaii. And then I wanted to show you this image of the Shiva Murugan temple in Concord. So, you know, this is a tradition that is popular and native to South India, but you know, especially over the last 100 years, it's really grown out and blossomed and become globally engaged. And so with what Chetty is doing is really part of this ongoing conversation where this tradition is everywhere. And for a while, Swedenborg was a really important part of it. How much? Yeah, like I had said before, Saiva Siddhanta has this kind of uniquely dualistic theology. So the soul exists as distant from God, but can achieve union with God through yoga, which really mirrors the way that Swedenborg talks about celestial angels, which I think is really cool. As Guruji says, in this mukti liberated stage, both Vedanta and Saiva Siddhanta differ. Saiva Siddhānta says that the Atman, the soul, and the Paramatman, the God soul, are different, just like a cast iron and the magnet. Just like the iron will exude the qualities of a magnet, they're still one but separate. And this gets incredibly complicated, and I'm not going to go into it because it's just a massive, massive science that's absolutely beautiful, and especially when we consider Swedenborg's work on the soul and Swedenborg's understanding of the dynamics of consciousness and how kind of the subtle spiritual energies of consciousness interact with the physical brain. And what I started realizing is that we have these kind of sacred systems of interoception, I like to call them, which basically you could say fill up the space of the inside of the body in the same way that spoken language fills up the space of auditory experience. So I think the linguistic way of thinking about it is really helpful. So there are two people who Chetty specifically cites as direct influences for him. The first one is Arunka Navalar, and he was known, so I'm just going to read what Chetty says. The object of his whole life had been to restore his mother tongue to its pristine purity and Śaiva Siddhanta to its place as one of the oldest religions in the world. The spirit he infused has not died out, and it is certain that it will live as long as the Tamil language and Śaiva Siddhanta live. Had it not been for him, it is profitable that no vestige of Śaiva Siddhanta would have been at this time left in Ceylon. So, and then the second person is Sriman Manjayam Nalaswami Pillai, who I am a huge fan of. And so Chetty says, the Reverend Scholar Sriman Manjayam Nalaswami Pillai sent me an invitation to meet him at Cuddalore more than 12 years ago and requested me, as he was growing old, to take up the burden of spreading Śaiva Siddhanta after him. From that day, my deep study of Śaiva Siddhanta commenced, although I had been a student of that philosophy long before. So Chetty is really born at this place where, largely because of colonialist influences, Śaiva Siddhanta was in danger of disappearing. And these two men in the late 19th century had done an enormous amount of work to preserve this tradition. And he made a printing press and was actually the first person to make a Tamil translation of the Bible. And he was known for using Christian missionary tactics against them. And I think this is really cool because you kind of see Chetty doing the same thing. And then later on with the Śaiva Siddhanta Church, it becomes like, well, you know, how can religions actually kind of build upon one another and make each other more successful and spread more easily. And then Pillai takes the same texts and translates them takes the Śaiva Agamas and translates them into English and German. And okay, I need to hurry up. The Brahmo Samaj is a reformist sect founded in 1830, which was this kind of edgy, radical Hindu sect that really influenced Chetty. One of the most important people in the Brahmo Samaj was this guy, Keshav Chandra Sen, who in 1870 ended up sailing to London, visiting the London Swedenborg Society, came back, fell out of favor because he had been known as a women's rights activist, and then he married his 14-year-old daughter to the Raj. So he disappears for a couple of years and then shows up again playing music for Paramahansa Sri Ramakrishna, and who was the guru of Swami Vivekananda. And Swami Vivekananda was a massive influence on Gopaul Chetty. And he was largely responsible for introducing Hinduism to the West in 1893 at the Chicago World Parliament of Religions, which was partially organized by Swedenborgians. So there's all of that beautiful tangle. I wish I had more time to talk about that. But at the same time, there were all of these interesting guys all around India engaging with Swedenborg, writing about Swedenborg, setting up Swedenborgian institutions. And each one of these guys has an absolutely amazing story. Sadhu Sundar Singh starts out as a Sikh, ends up traveling to Sweden, studying Swedenborg, coming back, founding a whole bunch of Swedenborgian schools around Allahabad, going full on becoming a sadhu, and disappearing into the Himalayas in 1929. Mani Shankar Bhatt was the head of the Swedenborg Society from 1914 to 1923. He used this pen name by which he was known as a very well-respected Gujarati poet, and wrote some kind of spicy editorials that I have certain feelings about, but we won't go into that right now. So Chetty was running this magazine called The New Reformer from 1907 to 1917. He had been a lawyer, like I said, but at some point, this magazine started getting really popular, and it had contributions from people all over the world. Leo Tolstoy wrote for it. And in 1910, an Englishman, and it wasn't just one person, it was a bunch of people started giving him articles on Swedenborg. And so Chetty started getting interested and had this kind of, this vague interest for a while, until in 1917, World War I caused a paper shortage and the magazine had to shut down. And Chetty had kind of put his entire life into this thing. He had quit his job as a lawyer. And then in 1918, his wife died. And so he's just, I think he was like 60 years old, and he hit an existential roadblock. And so he says in 1918, I began a deeper study of all the works of Swedenborg after buying them from the Swedenborg Society of India and Bombay. The study led me to the discovery that Swedenborg's teachings threw a flood of new light upon the Śaiva Siddhanta philosophy of Southern India, and that his teachings contained many truths which India did not all know. I therefore translated into Tamil Swedenborg's Intercourse of the Soul and Body and published it with copious notes and comments towards the end of 1921. So he distributes this commentary of Intercourse of the Soul and Body all over the place, which I think is really cool that that's the text he chose because it's particularly yogic. And it gets a fantastic reception. And so he starts going back to Nalaswami Pilay's articles that he had written for the New Reformer, and he starts writing kind of commentaries back on these articles that are comparing pure Śaiva Siddhanta to Swedenborg in this book, New Light on Indian Philosophy, Swedenborg and Śaiva Siddhanta. And this book was how I got introduced to Chetty. I found the PDF of this online, and have since poured through every inch of it. And it's an absolutely fascinating kind of theological treatise that really, I think, does justice to both traditions in some ways that can be rather critically analyzed. So in the same year, 1923, Bhatt, who Mani Shankar Bhatt, dies at 54 en route from Lahore to Rawalpindi, and Chetty takes over as the president of the Hindi Swedenborg Society. I want you to pay close attention to this title page right here, because if you look at this publisher, J.M. Dent and Sons Limited, is not a Swedenborgian publisher. And that's going to be important because this shows that even at this stage, there was resistance to publishing his work, to really supporting him in any way from the West. more of Chetty's publications, he starts writing and writing and writing and really starts this incredible, what he's calling the missionary tour, talking to all of these Śaiva Siddhanta organizations and really preaching this very unique kind of hybridized spirituality. And at first, people aren't interested at all, but then after Swedenborgian Saiva Siddhanta shows up on the scene, he starts getting a much better kind of reception. And one of the interesting dynamics that shows up is that all of the Christian missionary churches, the mainline Christian missionary churches, start outlawing Swedenborg because it gets so popular that they actually have to crack down. And so what Chetty does, what he's explaining in this quote, is he actually goes to these churches and starts distributing free or cheap pamphlets after every service. And so he's like sneaking in at coffee hour, trying to get Christians to listen to him. But basically, because of this dynamic, the spread of Swedenborgian thought and awareness of Swedenborg was almost entirely within Śaiva Siddhanta communities. And he, from 1923 to 1953, over this period of like 30 years, he works absolutely tirelessly. And I have pages and pages and pages of quotations, which I'm not going to read because I don't have time, but there are, people praising this stuff, people, the science of correspondences is the key that unlocks the mystic lore of the Tamilians. It was incredibly popular. We have a couple of pictures. This is from Swedenborg's birthday celebration, and it's beautiful. They're doing a little Guru Puja. So this is a picture of Swedenborg, which you can see in one of the other pictures, with a garland around it, and Chetty's standing behind it. And there's women and children and whole families. Like this was a community. This is a list of all the people who are there. More pictures. This is a really interesting one because it says the opposition that I encountered in my work in the beginning of it more than 10 years ago has now been overcome, and now people in South India are ready to accept Swedenborg as their guru. And so all of that is going on. And then in 1943, this guy, Erik Scherpe, writes a letter, and he is the librarian at the Swedenborg Bokforlaget, the publisher in Stockholm. And he says, among other things, that adherents of the highest religious caste in southern India, the Śaiva Siddhanta, who believe in only one God, revere Swedenborg as their spiritual teacher and read his writings with great appreciation. Their interest dates from about a quarter of a century ago, and their adherents number more than 10 million souls. And I have no way to really verify that number, but it's certainly interesting. And I think that it's certainly possible that Chetty might have reached 10 million people. And I think that it seems like at one time, Swedenborg was a common household name in this area. So his relationship with the West actually got pretty tense. I have 2 more minutes. I'm going to try and wrap up this story in a way that makes sense. So they got pretty tense, and this is an editorial written by Chetty's lifelong friend H.N. Morris in 1930. It's difficult to write about the work that has been done by Gopaul Chetty in the south of India because it is not acknowledged by or supported in any way by the conference. But such help as has been given to this purely Indian movement has been given privately and by means of grants towards the costs of some of the publications of the Swedenborg Society in Tamil. So they wouldn't pay him to actually maintain these book rooms that he was keeping up. They would only pay him to do translations. And what this meant is that when he got old enough that he was no longer able to do the translating work, he ended up destitute, and the whole movement was basically wiped from the history books. Chetty's kind of final thing that he wanted to do was he was publishing this book that he titled Jesus is God. So we can really see how he definitely gets a little bit more Christian, and some of the Saiva Siddhantans that I talked to are like, yeah, he starts off as a Shaivite theologian, but then he gets to a point where he's essentially just a Christian missionary. And I think some of like the Western churches demand that we're at 40 minutes, give me 5 more. The Western churches demands that this organization conform to what a Western church looks like, to an ecclesiastical organization, and not a guru lineage, which is what it had kind of developed into and what Swedenborg was being accepted as. It seemed to have kind of damaged his mission. But it's an interesting question. And I love this quote: "To be successful, the new church must liberalize its teachings. Swedenborg did not come to add another church to the numerous churches of Christianity already existing. His church is to be universal. I am fully convinced that if his teachings are correctly interpreted and proclaimed to the world, men of all the warring creeds of the world can unite in one universal church. I am of the opinion that the East and West can thus be brought together under the banner of one religion based on the teachings of Swedenborg." I am critical of this statement because I think it still falls into an assumption of kind of universalist dogmatism. And I think that instead of abandoning kind of the relationship and the conversation between the East and West, I think what we're being charged to do is enter into it with an attitude of humility and curiosity. Because like I said at the beginning, I learned yoga at Bryn Athyn College, and yet nothing is known about Gopaul Chetty, nothing is known of this whole movement. And so I'm kind of actively working to fix that. So, you know, he in 1948 or in 1953, Chetty dies, and he was basically blind and destitute and abandoned by the church after being one of the most successful Swedenborgian evangelists and most popular Swedenborgian theologians in history. So I started asking myself this question: was Swedenborg a yogi? And can we learn something from the practice and the tradition of yoga that will teach us something about what Swedenborg was doing? When we look at his ideas of the subtle body, when we look at his breath practices, his ideas of the brain, his ideas of the kind of the anatomy of consciousness, is this actually a relationship that we can learn a lot from? And I just wanted to, this is from The Wisdom of Jesus and the Yoga Siddhas. Yoga is not a religion, however, it could be viewed to be the practical side of all religions. Yoga emphasizes no philosophical or theological beliefs, but practical experimentation, verification, and realization. It is therefore scientific in that it proposes hypotheses, the techniques of yoga, testing, practice, and recording experiences in comparison with other practitioners, just as modern scientists do. So I started expanding my field research, and I started working with this wonderful delight of a Swami named Shiva Yogi Shiva Rajan. And so he runs the Tirumular Siddha Research Foundation. This is him torturing a child. And these are all of the books that he writes. And he's an absolute treasure and a wonderful theological thinker. He's working on a commentary on the Tirumandram, and he has a strong interest in interoceptive meditation across religious traditions, including Islam, Catholicism, Taoism, and Swedenborgianism. He currently has over 1,000 students and has been teaching for over 40 years. So, he has this ashram, and Swamiji was talking to me, and he wants to offer free classes to the Swedenborgian community. We're going to be accepting donations for the ashram, of course, but attendance at the classes is completely free. And we're going to start by reading Swedenborg and Saiva Siddhanta together, and he can tell us what Chetty got wrong, what Chetty got right, and we can have a really fun time kind of going over it and talking about all of these things with somebody who is a dear friend of mine, and this is really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, because I think that everyone should take advantage. So this is going to be hosted by Our Daily Bread. It's going to be started after July 15th, and keep your eyes out for more information on that. And I got it right at 45 minutes. That's good enough for me. So are there any questions?
Way to go.
Marathon.
That was an amazing, as you said, an unbelievable amount of information in 40 minutes. As someone who knows nothing about Hinduism, pretty much, if I had it up there, I could see it. Saiva, what are you calling this branch of Hinduism?
Śaiva Siddhanta.
Saiva Siddhanta. Is it a branch? How can I call it a branch of Hinduism, or is that just not accurate?
That works. The technical term is sampradaya.
Sampradaya.
Fancy.
Sampradaya. Okay. Okay.
And the word Śaiva Siddhanta, so Śaiva is Shiva, of course, and Siddhanta, it means like doctrine, like the authoritative doctrine, the authoritative teaching. So it's the authoritative teaching on Shiva.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll look forward to what continues to unfold here.
Yeah, and look out for that class, because it's really it's going to be delightful. I really, really have deep affection for this guy, and I think he's a treasure.
Wonderful.
Eleanor, I asked a question.
In the chat.
In the chat, but I'll ask you, what do you know about the current Swedenborgian situation in India? Because I know there are some. I'm friends with some on Facebook.
Yeah, I'm good friends with Peter Devasi, who's kind of head of the head of the church over there. I've also kind of become the person that, when Hindus are interested in Swedenborg, I've become the person that they contact. So I have contacts all over the country who are people who are Swedenborgian, and I know that Off the Left Eye, India is the #5 country in viewership. So it's there, and I've been working with Peter and talking about Peter, and he has some wonderful plans, and I really hope that we as a church can support them.
Is he and his group, are they Christian, or are they related to the Chetty
he
group?
comes out of Thomistic Catholicism and knew nothing about Gopaul Chetty when I asked him about it, which is interesting. Well, it's 3:18, so I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to share this. I think it's a really, really important story. And, for me, just discovering this, it completely, expanded my awareness of what the new church could be. And, going forward, I have a grant to go to India. I have a grant to go over there and do some research. I'm going to Swamiji is a licensed tour guide, So I'm going to hire him to be my tour guide over there. And if anyone else wants to come with me and, you know, meditate in a Gahat for a couple of months, there's certainly spots on the plane. Thank you, my loves.
Thank you very much. Blessings. Take it easy.
Mm-hmm.